Welcome to the ACRL Presidential Candidates Forum. My name is Jennifer Newtfall. I'm the current chair of the ACRL Leadership Recruitment and Nomination Committee. And it's my pleasure to introduce our candidates for ACRL Vice President, President-elect. So Karen Monroe is Associate Dean of Learning and Research Services at Simon Fraser University in British Columbia. Prior to joining SFU, she was head of the University of Oregon Portland Library and Learning Commons for 9 years. Karen has also served as the e-learning librarian at UC Berkeley and as a literature librarian at the University of Oregon in Eugene. Karen has been an active ACRL member since joining the association in 2002 with service and leadership roles in LES, WESS, IS, and in ACRL at the division level. She's also the author of a book published in 2017, Tactical Urbanism for Librarians, which examines ways in which librarians can adopt placemaking strategies to get projects done quickly, cheaply, and efficiently. Karen also holds an MLS from the University of British Columbia and an MFA from the University of Iowa. She's interested in how academic and research librarians can develop their skills and reputation as teaching partners in and across their institutions. She also tries to read at least 50 books a year. Joining me today, our other candidate is Penny Biley. A first-generation college student, Penny holds a PhD in curriculum and instruction from the University of Central Florida, along with undergraduate and master's degrees from the University of Kentucky. She is Associate Director for Research, Education, and Engagement at the University of Central Florida Libraries, where she also leads a campus-wide textbook affordability initiative and a large-scale correlating use of library services with student success metrics. She has served as adjunct instructor for the University of South Florida School of Information, and prior to coming to UCF, was head of education resources at Louisiana State University and social sciences librarian at Miami University in Ohio. In her 25 years of service to the Association of College and Research Libraries, she's served as a member and chair of numerous committees in the Education and Social Sciences section, as chair of EBSS and recipient of its Distinguished Librarian of the Year Award, as member and chair of various ACRL committees, and as chair of the ACRL Awards Task Force. She's also an avid researcher who enjoys collaborating with fellow librarians, instructional designers, and subject faculty. So welcome, Carrie and Penny. The Leadership Recruitment and Nomination Committee put together 5 questions for you both to respond to today. So what we'll do is go through each question. You have 4 minutes to respond, and we'll alternate the order in terms of who gets to respond first, and then we'll have closing statements at the end. So our first question is, in a brief meeting with top-level higher ed administrators or accrediting agency leaders, how would you represent the value of academic and research libraries in 21st century higher education? What might you say about the current roles played by or functions served by librarians in faculty research, teaching, and student learning? So Penny, you are up first.
Great, thank you, Jennifer, and hello, everyone. I love this question. I think telling our story and communicating our worth to university administrators is one of the most critical activities that we can do. However, in my experience, to be heard, the story has to be compelling and meet an established strategic priority or need, and it helps if we connect the dots between our activities and how they support our institutional goals. It just so happens that I've been invited to present at a provost retreat for high-level administrators on just this topic. So again, this question is especially timely for me. That presentation was originally scheduled for today, 1 hour before this session, but thankfully was moved to next month, so I'm staying today, or at least as good as it gets. Anyway, for that presentation, I will lead into the discussion by describing how academic libraries have changed, the drivers behind that change, and how we've re-envisioned our service models to accommodate those changes. This part is related to a later question, our Q&A, so I won't elaborate on those aspects of the presentation right now. I'll address those in a later question. So our university administrators are very focused on student success. We generally define that as GPA, retention and time to graduation, and this is due to performance-based funding metrics from the state level. So in this presentation, I will touch on two large-scale projects that I lead that you mentioned earlier, Jennifer. The first is a study that compared student library use to academic performance, and the other is textbook affordability. The library study tracked students who used one or more of 5 library services over a year. We found that of the 25,000 library users, which is about 40% of our student enrollments, had an average end-of-semester GPA of 3.20 compared to 3.05 for their non-library using counterparts. So what we have is hard evidence that the library contributes to student success at our institution. We are continuing the study and are working with our institutional effectiveness unit to create a visualization dashboard with the goal of rolling up the data for university-wide student success analytics. The second initiative, textbook affordability, we've worked with instructional designers and faculty to save students about $500,000 over the past 2 years. While we have local student satisfaction survey results, we don't yet have academic performance metrics. So I will cite a large-scale study that tracked academic performance of 40,000 students from across 11 institutions. The study authors found that students who had access to no or low-cost course materials enjoyed higher GPAs, increased retention rates, and quicker time to graduation. Again, this speaks to the language of our administrators and relates to strategic goal metrics. Following this, I will touch on our research services, our student-centered library building redesign, where we're creating collaborative learning spaces with our campus partners, and the evolution of our collections with a focus on how they support both faculty research and distance and online students. I'm going to go a little bit further here. I think I might have a little bit of time and relate this to ACRL. And so the Value of Academic Libraries Committee has done an absolutely spectacular job of moving forward their goal of assisting academic libraries in demonstrating alignment with and impact on institutional outcomes. And I'm excited to see the visualization dashboard of library impact that OCLC is putting together for them. The 2016 Ithaca survey reports suggests that library deans and directors acknowledge that connecting the library to student success is a priority, yet many admitted that they have not articulated how libraries contribute to this mission. So access to that assessment, again, driven by ACRL and the Value of Libraries Committee, is essential for libraries that have not conducted their own studies. And a possible next step to move that along would be to create a community of practice around the dashboard and study results and populate it with successful examples, graphics, and marketing tools, and a place to have discussions. That's it.
Great. Thank you so much, Penny. All right, Karen.
Hi, Jennifer. Hi, everybody. I agree with Penny. This is a terrific question. It's also a very big question, so I'll do my best in 4 minutes. If I were to have that kind of a conversation with higher ed leaders, I think the first thing I would probably want to do is to sort of prime the terms of the conversation by starting with some general comments about the changing nature of libraries. So I think one thing that I like to always articulate clearly is that there's a traditional association of libraries with collections, but that's really evolved by now to include libraries as full partners in teaching and learning, and as well in the full life of students, so the social, mental wellness, even moral and ethical lives of students, along with the acculturation and scholarly practice that we expect from a college degree. And in that respect, librarians have been flexible and future-oriented and responsive to the changing needs of higher education for decades, if not more, and that we've developed new expertise in areas, for example, in research data management, where we see growth in needs, while at the same time ensuring that our core values around intellectual freedom, for instance, or privacy and equity stay in the conversation. So one common way that those value conversations can go, I think, is around financial value. Often it's return on investment, which is understandable. And I think a couple of valuable points I would want to make would be that within the larger organization, libraries have been leaders in finding cost efficiencies. For a very long time, librarians have been canning negotiators for campuses and securing scholarly resources. We are excellent consortium builders. We are also leaders in developing alternatives to some of the problematic publishing systems and other vendor systems that we deal with. Another, I think, important point for that conversation in terms of library value on campus is that we're non-siloed areas for investment in student learning and faculty productivity. So investing in the library means everyone on campus can benefit, as opposed to having to make decisions about investing in particular disciplinary areas or research units. So those are a couple of points I would always like to make about the financial investment. There's another aspect, a dimension of value, which is less concretely financial, and it's more about the social or the cultural or, as I said, maybe ethical or moral worth of what we contribute. I think libraries and librarians epitomize many of the shared scholarly and cultural aims in higher education around intellectual freedom and privacy and democracy and the common good. I think that that's true both in concrete ways in our policies and our practice, but also in terms of our standing in the larger culture. We are leaders in those areas, and I think that reflects well in our institutions. I think if I were to speak a little more about the current roles played by librarians in libraries and faculty research and teaching and student learning, there's a lot to say there, but if I really had to narrow it down, I think, again, libraries are changing constantly in response to and predictions about higher education and demographic change and socioeconomic realities and so on. And individual libraries navigate those changes differently, and that's as it should be. But nationally, we know that we have developed priorities around student learning, librarians as teaching partners, increasing pedagogical and instructional design expertise in librarianship, and around changes to the research environment. So librarians have developed expertise for handling big data, and around influencing research funders and publishers in areas like openness. So again, I sort of return to our professional values around equity and inclusion and intellectual freedom. I think these are defining characteristics for our profession, and we are strongly associated with the teaching and upholding of those values, and that's an inherent benefit to our students and faculties and our larger communities.
Great, thank you so much. So we're going to move on to question 2, and we try to pack a lot into these questions. So question 2 is, relationships between academic libraries and commercial partners have evolved to a state in which the two are often both deeply interdependent and adversarial, especially as libraries work towards accelerating the transition to more open and equitable systems of scholarship, an ACRL strategic goal. What philosophy should ACRL project regarding cooperation between mission-driven, not-for-profit academic libraries and for-profit vendors of products and services? What kinds of things might ACRL do to promote healthy vendor-library relationships? So Karen, you are first up.
Okay, great, thank you. Yes, these are great. These are very packed questions, and it's great. They're fun to contemplate. So I think the first thing that I would want to recognize about this question is that this is not a dilemma that's unique to libraries. Most mission-driven professions work in some kind of a partnership with commercial partners, and they have to figure out how to shape those relationships ethically and effectively. So think of doctors working with pharmaceutical companies, architects working with construction vendors. It's not something that is restricted to the library realm, although it might feel like sometimes that's the case. So we don't necessarily want to do the work that our commercial partners do, and it can be very healthy and productive, I think, to have to navigate this terrain as long as we keep the relationship in balance. So that said, I think that our relationship with our commercial partners is undergoing some rapid change and some accelerating complexity at the moment. I think once upon a time, maybe, we had concerns about journal costs or frequently edited, reissued textbooks, and that was plenty. But now we're seeing a consolidation of products with decreasing number of providers, so there's less competition in the landscape. We're also seeing vendors moving out of the collections arena and into the whole information lifecycle, different kinds of metrics and analytics, data gathering, and so on. So now we need to be concerned not only with what we get from vendors, but what they're pulling from us, what patron data they are drawing and what they're doing with it, as well as with how our commercial partners might be approaching our partners on campus without our participation. So that's a new landscape for us, I think. It's been pointed out pretty widely in the library world that there are many very business savvy and smart people among our commercial partners. There are people who know a great deal about publishing and business management and who have, just as we do, a very strong understanding of licensing and copyright, and who have influential voices on the law related to digital and copyright and privacy issues. So as librarians, that's a good thing that those people are working in partnership with us, but we need to stay informed and engaged with what's happening in the commercial scene. And we also need to own our values and our convictions. So depending on the situation, we may or may not have the financial upper hand. The situation in Germany comes to mind, of course, in this conversation. But we have other tools as well, such as we have our collegial relationships with other library and higher education partners. We have our skills, our deep skills in consortium building and organizing. We have a very long history of navigating vendor agreements. And as I said, we have our core values to help us, find our way. In concrete terms, I'm very interested in the example that Spark is setting right now. One of the things they're doing is engaging a consultant to do a comparative intelligence report on Elsevier and some other commercials who are expanding into scholarly communications. So we don't have to be business analysts ourselves, but we can recognize the need for full information and a nuanced understanding, the importance of getting good advice, and we can put resources toward that at the association level. And the other thing that I think is worth commenting on is that we can also look internationally for examples of what our peers are doing, even if they are in slightly different cultural and legal contexts. I'm fortunate right now to work at Simon Fraser University in BC in Canada, which houses the Public Knowledge Project. It's an international, I would say, standard bearer for open source and open access scholarly communication. It develops and provides the framework for open journals, open conference, open monograph, and also open now metadata indexing software. That is a really robust and stable and globally adopted alternative to commercial vendor products, which is one example, I think, of librarians keeping that relationship balanced. It's a really stellar example, I think, of what libraries and librarians are capable of in this arena.
Great, thank you. Penny?
Okay, this is an important issue. Like Karen said, these are really pithy, excellent questions. So thank you for that as well too, Jennifer. Along with being important, it's also really difficult to tackle because not all vendors follow the same practices. As we know, there are varying degrees of cooperation and openness already. And something that Karen alluded to, on the one hand, you see post-lists complaining about vendors contacting faculty directly to pressure libraries into purchases. But on the other, we also rely heavily on vendors for their support with our awards, publications, and programs, of course, not to mention acquiring their products for our library collections or services. In preparation for this question, I reviewed vendor relations committee minutes and charges from ACRL and other ALA divisions. Some of the committee charges are fairly limited in scope. They include language like serve as liaison to vendors for outreach and fundraising purposes, and encourage and develop relationships with private sector entities for the support of section activities. These committees appear to have been formed for the express purpose of soliciting vendor funding. But there are two other examples I came across that are exemplars of cooperation and healthy dialogue. One of them is in ACRL, the Science and Technology Section's Vendor Relations Discussion Group, which states that it offers an open forum embracing dialogue dedicated to issues and improved communication. Another section vendor relation is in RUSA. It's STARS, and they have a committee that states its mission is to provide a forum for the exchange of information between resource sharing practitioners and the providers of products and services that support resource sharing. Similarly, I attended a discussion at Midwinter where I learned of a disclaimer statement on choice webinars that are vendor sponsored. So this isn't my original idea, but I think it's a great model to follow. And again, this goes along with transparency, openness, and our ethical values. And along those same lines, a Research and Scholarly Environment Committee working group is crafting a resolution to remind us to be aware of and support openness through personal action and activities. So again, it all kind of comes back to those professional values, the openness and transparency that we're trying to achieve. So perhaps one of the things we could do is craft a vendor disclaimer statement that could be used throughout ACRL to attach to sponsor-supported scholarships, awards, functions, and receptions. And so just to wind up on this particular question, to summarize, I would suggest a two-pronged approach of asking ACRL communities of practice to revisit their missions and language of their vendor relations committees and consider adopting language more in line with that whole spirit of cooperation and open communication. and also to provide disclaimers for vendor support and statements that lay out the positives of those long-term continuous relationships.
Thank you. So moving to question 3, developing a racially, ethnically, and economically diverse library workforce has been a topic within librarianship for years, if not decades. Yet librarianship remains a disproportionately white profession that does not reflect the diversity of the communities it serves. What specific actions could ACRL take to make a diverse library profession a reality? And how can ACRL be a more inclusive organization? And this time we'll start with Penny.
Okay, thank you, Jennifer. I approached this question by looking at how ACRL can assist external entities, ALA, library schools, institutions, and individuals to help make a diverse library profession a reality, and then did a scan of the association proper to look at how ACRL can be a more inclusive organization. So first, external. Working with ALA, ACRL could assist with marketing of librarianship as a profession with specific outreach to people of color. When do most people decide on a career path? To start there, and what are the most compelling reasons for becoming a librarian? Include those in our outreach. Working with ALICE and library schools, ACRL could promote academic library work and ACRL membership benefits to students and recent grads. Could do this by offering webinars that describe member values, such as opportunities for professional development and access to communities of practice, conference attendance support, and other networking opportunities. Include information on ACRL structure and dues and tips on how to get involved. And then working with member libraries, ACRL could draft an actionable resolution on diversity that goes beyond the standard EEOO statements that libraries can adopt, post, and act upon. This resolution could possibly address diversity in hiring, be included in institutional mission statements and faculty and student handbooks, and drive staff training. And then finally, from the external view, there's opportunity to work at the individual level. From my experience, working in a library, whether as a student assistant or in another non-librarian role, is where a lot of people first become interested in librarianship. And frontline librarians can play an important part in this by recruiting and mentoring groups that are of interest, who are interested in librarianship. But these people may need examples of programming and successful outreach, or learn more about informal mentoring programs. So ACRL could create a mentorship community of practice with marketing materials and ideas for local programming. Moving on to that second question, how can ACRL be a more inclusive organization, required an internal scan of the association. First and foremost, continue what is being done or planned. There are amazing initiatives already underway. The Diversity Alliance is really taking off. The Spectrum Scholar Program is an example of a long-standing successful initiative, and discussion of EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion as a signature initiative has the opportunity to pull all these two programs together under one umbrella while also infusing EDI throughout the association. So these are large-scale successful activities that are working toward a unified goal, but I think there are a few additional possibilities to pursue. First, we need to cultivate a culture of welcoming and mentorship. In this particular instance, by reaching out to all new members in a personal way, we have opportunity to benefit all. So this is our target populations as well as everybody. At Midwinter, we asked several guests who are interested in volunteering for a committee how they had found out about it. To a person, they said that they had received no email, no welcome. Instead, they had come to the meeting because a member had suggested it. As an association, we can do better. I also recently read about the kitchen table discussions that were looking at the pathways new members followed to find their first ALA community. We could follow up more specifically with members of target populations. What were their experiences to participation? How can we remove barriers and make the association more welcoming, more transparent, and meet their needs? And finally, I think we have opportunity to work more closely with the ethnic affiliates by collaborating on programming and professional development. Membership surveys indicate that the number one barrier to joining ACRL is cost. So it costs $30 to join CALA, the Chinese American Library Association. ACRL is, I think, $125. I recently spoke with the presidents of APALA, Asian Pacific American Library Association, and CALA, and each said they would welcome outreach and collaboration from ACRL. We can do this by working with academic sections of these associations to combine programs at the Joint Conference for Librarians of Color and create opportunities for professional development overlap. The goal here is not to pull members from the affiliates, but to ensure that all academic librarians are successful. And I think I'm right at my time, or I could just keep going on this topic all day. So I'll stop here.
Thank you. Karen?
Thanks, Jennifer. Yes, this is a really important topic that I think has been of interest and concern to both Penny and myself for years. And before I say anything else, I want to acknowledge that I know a lot of work is happening in this area within ACRL. Penny mentioned the several aspects of that, the Diversity Alliance project, the Diversity Committee, the Spectrum Scholarship, and then all kinds of activities that we know are happening in individual sections and interest groups. I've been engaged in sort of diversity work for the profession since early in my career at the campus level. I've seen many approaches tried, cultural competency, filling the pipeline and so on. All I think were undertaken in good faith as an effort to try to move the needle, but I don't think any of them have panned out the way we've wanted. And the question itself notes that, although this has been an area of concern for our profession for decades, we haven't seen the numbers change the way that we want them to. So we know what some of the challenges are. For our profession, we require a master's degree, so we're talking about building pipelines well before the master's degree. We're talking also about challenges like creating critical mass so that successful candidates of color don't suffer race exhaustion or just general exhaustion from perpetually representing. We also have to consider that our larger institutions, our towns, and our communities play a role in making positions welcoming or not welcoming for candidates. So some of those things can feel like they are out of our control. And I think I've heard librarians express all of those concerns and more as issues in helping to address this issue for the profession. So one new development in the area, though, I think within the last decade or so is that I find very interesting is critical librarianship, which goes, I think, beyond some of the strategies we've tried in the past and looks more at critiquing our profession in the larger cultural context in which we operate. I think some of the critical thinking that is in the conversation now represents a step forward in terms of examining what our own assumptions are, and as well in articulating and creating a shared vocabulary around, for instance, white privilege, the role of white privilege in maintaining the status quo, despite our own desire to encourage diversity, that we might be working in some cases at cross purposes, even to what our stated desire is. And I said, and also in terms of making space to actually listen to people of color on these issues. I think that there has been some progress made through this school of thought. So, for example, while one approach might have been to create a scholarship opportunity to offer to underrepresented candidates, we might instead look critically at the opportunity in terms of the barriers that are implicit in it. What prerequisites, what fees, what relationships or awareness do you need to have to even know that it's available? And we might start having really serious conversations about those issues, those prerequisites before we even start talking about operationalizing a strategy like that. And that's a difference in approach that I don't think I saw that when I was doing this work in, say, the early 2000s. In terms of making that more concrete, because I recognize that this is still a sort of a theoretical conversation, I'm inspired by some projects that I've seen very recently. One of them is the Data for Black Lives project at MIT, and the 2017, just at the end of last year, Documenting the Now Symposium on Digital Blackness in the Archive, which is a collaboration among 3 universities and the Mellon Foundation. So the reason I'm looking at those events, those recent events, is that I think that they show an example of concretizing the work of intentionally and thoughtfully answering the question, who are we for, and who are we concerned with, who's reflected, and who matters in our spaces and in our work. I think that that kind of work, that kind of demonstration it shows us how we can visibly acknowledge and grapple with that larger context that I think we find often quite frustrating when we're trying to operationalize strategies. So when we're trying to grapple with the distribution of wealth and privilege and opportunity, I think that that's an example of concretely doing that critical work in the world. I'll also say, in respect to this, that another trend that I think is very productive and heartening is the increasing work that librarians are doing in ethnographic research and getting out of libraries and finding other ways to see ourselves and our work through our users' eyes. So that's a broad statement, but I think that there's an application there for this question. In terms of what ACRL can do, I think ACRL can support all of this kind of work through the existing strategic priorities, through the work of the Diversity Committee, through the chapters in particular, which I think speaks somewhat to the inclusiveness question, because I think chapter and regional involvement tends to be more accessible to many of our members than national conference involvement. Through the roadshows, for example, is something that ACRL already has running as a program that I think would be amenable to this kind of programming. And through exploring, I think, additional projects, taking models from some of our peer organizations. The ACRL Fellowship for Digital and Inclusive Excellence is an example of a program running now that I think is really interesting. That project works to bring underrepresented undergraduates into the profession by getting them interested in librarianship, giving them context, giving them opportunities well before they get to the MLIS level. So I think that's a great example of something that we could do with ACRL that would help to change the conversation on this area.
All right, thank you. So we're going to move to question 4. We're getting close to the end. Just 2 more. So question 4 is, recent trends in librarianship have focused on imperatives for innovation in academic and research libraries. A survey of the library literature the past 10 years finds a great many publications titled The Academic Library as X or The Academic Librarian as Y, illustrating the ways in which libraries and librarians are adopting new and different roles. What might you say about the factors driving transformative change in academic libraries, and how can that change be balanced or reconciled with traditional roles and core missions? And Karen, you're up first.
Okay, great, thanks. So this is a really good, this might be the biggest question of all. I think that it is completely natural and healthy that librarians are pondering the scope and nature of our work. The world is changing constantly, has always done so. Our profession must change with it. And again, I look at other mission-driven professions for comparison. So for example, doctors might be working increasingly with the genome to address illness, but their underlying role as healers is still the same. I think librarians, in our case, we're no longer gatekeepers for information in the same way as we used to be. But I think it's also abundantly clear that we're still cultural and intellectual stewards for our institutions, and that we still provide guidance on managing and interpreting information and creating knowledge. So while I do see our roles changing in their specific elements, the kinds of teaching that we do, the kinds of collections we're building, and the materials that we have expertise in handling, I don't know that I see any particular threat to our core values. And if anything, I think people are hungry for us to evidence and demonstrate those values more than ever. We're not alone in being awash in change and in confusion in some cases. I think that we're being asked to, along with many of our users, navigate changes like the kinds of jobs that are available to us and to our students. For us, the scale of data and information we're asked to manage, but also for our users. That's something that they're also grappling with. And things like the implications and the consequences of losing control of our personal data. These are the kinds of concerns that we have and that also that our users have. So when we're concerned about where we fit into the world of Google and Amazon or ResearchGate, I think we have to remember that people who use the library, our students and our faculty and our communities, are also very worried about where we're going, particularly with technology and explosion of information, if we subtract ethics and context. And those are things that librarians provide. We provide or we offer an understanding of the issues and the ability to explain them, and we have the ability to develop a plan to manage them. That's something that we do quite well. In some ways, we're the perfect people to do that. In one of the main areas where I'm most familiar with this is in instruction, where librarians have moved increasingly into a partner role with faculty, and it plays out differently in different ways, in different places. to provide critical thinking in digital and information literacy, and often really specific scholarly and digital training to students and faculty. I'll also just add that last year I had the opportunity to interview quite a few academic and public librarians in the course of writing a book, the one that Jennifer mentioned in the intro. These were all folks who were involved in projects that hinged on innovation and often had very limited resources. So I talked with, for example, Terry Reese, who wrote Mark Edit, which is a widely used tool for managing MARC records, and to Ginny Cooper, who led the rapid deployment of temporary library buildings for the DC public library system and rebuilt library services for user groups who had drifted during a long renovation project. So that experience for me, talking with so many librarians who were successfully driving change, not just responding, but driving to change based on their own talents and what they saw needed doing, it made me feel very optimistic about our profession's ability to transform itself in terms of the specific duties we might do, but still staying close to our roots in terms of our core mission.
Thank you. Penny?
Thank you. On this one, I'm going to talk about myself a little bit. So, I think this is all framed through my, my comments are framed through my perspective. But in this instance, a colleague and I analyzed all academic library and position announcements posted in 1996 and found 22 unique job titles across the 900 job ads that we looked at. So fast forward to 2011, and another colleague and I update that study using those job announcements from 2011 and found 33 positions. 11 new ones had emerged. And there had to be at least 6 in the category to be considered a new position. So some of the new job titles that we saw by 2011 were electronic resources, metadata, web services, scholarly communication, assessment, user services, and so on. And now, even since 2011, you see a lot more. I'm seeing online learning and instructional design, digital stewardship, institutional repository and research data services, textbook affordability, student success, first-year experience librarians, and things like that. So we put the factors driving this change into 3 primary groups. On the research front, we have new directions in publishing characterized by open mandates, use metrics and discoverability, and preservation and stewardship of digital products. Emerging positions associated with teaching and learning might be due to the advent of adaptive learning and competency-based education, online learning support, and pedagogical changes. And the increased emphasis on student success, and from my institutional perspective, the funding associated with it, is driving assessment, textbook affordability, and first-year experience and other student success positions. So that takes us to the second question, which is how do we balance this? Well, libraries are rapidly evolving and are challenged to adopt these new roles without letting go of legacy services. With 15 public-facing librarians and over 65,000 students, at our institution, we took a very intentional approach to how we could support these new roles, and that approach consisted of 3 steps. Of course, the first was to draft a strategic plan, which we did in 2015. Everything we do relates to an institutional goal. We read the Horizon Report, EDUCAUSE and ACRL Top Trends articles, and results of Ithaca surveys. We did an environmental scan of the institution and also looked at state requirements for higher education. And from there, we prioritized what roles we could assume to help support the institutional mission, in some cases positioning ourselves ahead of need that came shortly thereafter. So this led to the second step, the creation of a new service model, where we implemented a subject librarian liaison model to work closely with the program faculty, and an engagement librarian model where librarians work with campus partners to provide the goals to provide a unified, seamless blanket of academic support with emphasis on high priority student groups. In our case, those student groups are transfer students, first-year experience, undergrad research, and online students. Doing this required shifting responsibility for some traditional core services like staffing the reference desk to adjuncts and staff. This was all based on metrics that we had taken for a couple years to see where we were getting fewer substantive questions and more the directional. We also tried to scale some services like library instruction by creating information literacy modules and online courses which can be used alone or in tandem with in-person instruction. The information literacy modules are exceptionally successful. There are 12 of those, and they tend to get used over 50,000 times in a year by about 10,000 students. So as we assume these new responsibilities in areas like scholarly communication and GIS, we also saw the need for administration to support professional development for the librarians to learn these new skills. An example of this is our sociology and anthropology subject librarian, who also is providing GIS support. So she's taking GIS classes at the university on library time and actually going for her certificate. So we're having to grow our own or reskill, existing positions. We did not get new positions. So just to sum up, I think at our library we've moved thoughtfully to decide which responsibilities we could assume and which we could do well and met the institutional mission, shifted some of those responsibilities to others to free time for those new ones, and provided the support required to assume these new and emerging roles.
Thank you. And then our final question today, so question 5. There are growing concerns about the environmental and economic sustainability of national conferences, which I don't think is a surprise, and you've probably heard about. Additionally, when ACRL's business meetings take place at these venues, only those who are able to attend can fully participate in the work and leadership of the organization. How can ACRL address the sustainability of the large conference format while also providing more opportunities for members to engage with ACRL? And Penny, you're the first to answer this.
There were 2 perspectives to explore here. The first is the large conference sustainability and how it impacts ACRL revenues. And the second is ACRL member engagement and conference attendance. So we also need to differentiate between the semi-annual ALA conference and the biannual ACRL conference. And while ACRL member attendance at the ALA conferences might be waning a bit, especially at midwinter it seemed like this year, the biannual ACRL conference remains well attended and is a significant revenue generating proposition. So ALA is already enacting recommendations to make the semi-annual conference easier to navigate, smaller footprint and all that, so it should be easier to understand, and hopefully this will help with overall attendance. However, there is discussion about how ALA can develop programs and services that generate additional revenue, and with declining attendance, the possibility of branding Midwinter as a trade show. Should that happen, whether Midwinter becomes a trade show or is no longer held or any other options that are being explored, ACRL will definitely need to investigate the potential impact on its members. And this, of course, leads to member engagement and the conference model. So I recently saw an anthropology and sociology section membership survey go out on that list, asking people to respond to questions like why they're a member, what aspects of membership are most valued, and how the section can encourage continued involvement. While there is an ACRL membership survey, various communities of practice have their own cultures. For example, the instruction and education and behavioral sciences sections are almost all or wholly online. So they could survey their own members and craft their practices to meet those needs. I see a lot of different types of cultures as you move throughout our communities of practice. And from those, virtual meetings and volunteer opportunities seem to be the norm in most communities of practice that I'm aware of. Karen and I both attended a lot of committee meetings at Midwinter, and almost all had virtual attendees present. So not attending the conference doesn't have to preclude becoming a member or serving, to preclude a member from serving on a committee. But perhaps we can do a better job of alerting new members to opportunities to serve virtually if conference attendance is a significant challenge. We also can make digital participation easier for both in-person and virtual attendees. One way to do that is offering a user platform and coordinating this across all division units and making it available for use at conferences. At Midwinter, it wasn't unusual for committee chairs to spend 10 or 15 minutes trying to connect virtual attendees. We can streamline this and make it better, I think. So to summarize, overall, I think ACRL is doing a great job of balancing member engagement opportunities with conference attendance, but there's opportunity to improve the experience through technology. And the committees of practice could reach out to members to see if conference attendance is an obstacle to engagement and work to remove those barriers, create more virtual opportunities if that's called for. That's it.
Great, thank you.
Okay, great.
Karen?
I just have to say, it's such a pleasure listening to Penny answer these questions. They were given to us in advance, and we got the chance to review and prepare. And I just, as we have said throughout our candidacy, I think we would work so well together as co-presidents, if only that were possible. I've actually thought about this particular question quite a lot, the conference question, because I co-chaired a sustainability committee for the 2009 ACRL conference. And in 2014, I was invited to write a Taking Issues debate piece for Reference and User Services Quarterly, along with Marinda McClure. So in that piece, I was the, I guess maybe the pessimist in the conversation. So I was given the stance of we would no longer see so much in-person participation. That was my arguing point. And I took the sort of bold and futurist stance that the annual conference, ALA annual, would decrease in attendance by 1/2 or 3/4 in 10 to 12 years, mostly based on a technology argument, that we would have so many other means of getting together that in-person wouldn't make as much sense. And Marinda, I think, very rightly responded with many of the benefits of in-person, which I think we are aware of, the depth and the warmth of face-to-face and the better capacity for relationship and mentorship and understanding complex issues. And she also suggested that we might be moving to a model where we deliver the content of conferences in more bite-sized and piecemeal methods, which I think is actually really one of the keys and something that I think Penny just raised as well, because any conference actually serves multiple roles as a trade show and as a gathering place for mentors and mentees, as a place to move project work forward and get governance work done and so on. So I think we're learning to split those roles up in different and useful ways, to think differently about the conference itself as a monolithic genre. We're seeing more and more symposia and unconferences and webinars and so on. Increasingly, they've become normal in our profession, I think. There are a lot of different ways to do those things. Not every genre works for every audience and goal, but we have lots of options. And I think that ACRL has also shown itself to be a very flexible and responsive organization, especially for its size. I think it's pretty remarkable that in the course of my career, we've moved from a place where participation in the association was an expectation of 2 face-to-face conference trips a year to now where a junior librarian who has limited resources to travel can still do meaningful service work entirely over digital platforms. Our instruction section is now, there's no expectation of in-person conference attendance at all, and annual programs are going to be done digitally or virtually. So I think in some ways we're actually already answering this question just gradually and by degrees, just by letting the membership make its own decisions about how to do business as more opportunities for remote participation come out. I think we're also seeing more and more opportunities for participation and learning that don't depend on the national conference model. So we're seeing chapter conferences and so regional travel rather than national. Many of the units, sections and interest groups are offering web-based training for free or minimal cost. And we've changed the membership model to allow members to join more sections and interest groups, which means those lists are opened up to them as well as the in-person opportunities. And then there are opportunities like the roadshows, which bring ACRL training directly to institutions for shorter stints. And they can still offer cross-pollination when multiple institutions co-host those opportunities. So I think Penny has already sort of touched on the financial implications of and the health of the national conferences, the ACRL biannual versus the semi-annual conferences, which I think those are important points that we were made aware of at the midwinter that we attended governance meetings. And I think we just need to keep our ears open for new models. So, for example, one of our peer organizations, NISO, offers 5-hour virtual conferences. I know that one of our sections, the University Library section, posts recordings of their discussions to YouTube. So really interesting ways that different groups are finding to include people. I think one of the things ACRL could do is an environmental scan of what some of our peer associations or even some of our own sections and interest groups are doing in this regard, and offer new options or propose them, or propose different types of support to sections or interest groups if they'd like to pursue them. So as Penny mentioned, I think that some types of leadership may still require travel in future, but we sat in several governance meetings at midwinter that had people participating on phone or by Skype, which worked extremely well in most cases. So overall, I think we're finding that we're making these opportunities more accessible and inclusive and more ecologically responsible. And I think that the main ticket is that we need to be thinking about the goal of the meeting, whether it's whether we need something that's more face-to-face for mentorship or a nuanced understanding, or whether it's something that we can still accomplish remotely.
Well, first, I want to thank you both so much for taking the time and the thoughtfulness in answering the questions. I just want to acknowledge my committee that helped put these questions together, and once again, the thoughtful responses that you both offered. And so now there's some time for closing statements. And Karen,
sure,
I will go
thank
first
you. Well, I would like to thank the committee, the Leadership Recruitment and Nomination Committee, for the nomination and also for the Q&A today. So thank you, Jennifer, and the rest of the group. And also thanks to Megan Griffin at ACRL, who is behind the scenes today, but she's helping us with handling all the logistics. And of course, Penny Biley, my esteemed co-candidate, who has given such excellent and thoughtful responses today. I am so honored to stand for the position alongside Penny and alongside so many other terrific ACRL members who are standing for other offices this year. I hope that I'll have the opportunity to keep learning about the work that's ongoing on our strategic priorities and contributing to the momentum that we have going on student learning and showing our value, new roles and landscapes, and the changing research and scholarly environment, as well as cutting across all of those equity, inclusion, and diversity across our profession. And the last thing I'll say is just that I encourage all ACRL members to learn about their candidates in all the offices, to vote, and to get involved in ACRL.
Thank you,
okay, I could just
Karen.
say ditto, Karen, but I probably should fill up a little bit of time here. So I'd first like to acknowledge Jennifer and members of the Leadership Recruitment Nominations Committee, and Megan and the ACRL staff for their time and excellent facilitation of the Q&A session and the whole election process. I'd also like to thank Karen Monroe for her collegiality, grace, and kindness throughout the campaign process. She's been amazing. I have grown to know Karen over the past few months, and I'm confident that regardless of which candidate you support, you will not make a bad decision. And finally, if you're still with us here at the end, thank you for your time, your interest, and your support of the election process in ACRL. Thank you all.
Once again, thank you, Karen and Penny, for your time today, and thank you for everyone who ends up watching and listening to this today. A reminder that the election starts or opens on March 12th, so that is coming up very soon. And like has been said, I really do strongly encourage you to vote not only in this election, but all elections, as we do know that the results matter. So more information and details is available on the website listed here, and we'll look forward to the results. So again, thank you, Karen and Penny, and thank you so much, Megan,